there, Jan?
We're here with Industry 4.0 Club, and this is the Manufacturing Future Technology session here. Today we are joined with Todd Lukesh from Gafcon Digital, who is a architect, digital twin architect for Gafcon, as well as he has a little bit different perspective on digital twin that we're going to talk about here. Also joined by Ira Sharp, our co-host here from Industry 4.0 Club. And we're going to have a very broad and very interesting conversation today about digital twin, I am certain about. And as always, we are streaming live to LinkedIn. That's why you're seeing me right now, if you are. And so if you have a question, comment, please feel free to put it in the messaging on LinkedIn, and we'll try to bring some of those conversations into this broadcast here as well, where possible. But first, a quick introduction. This is Industry 4.0 Club, Manufacturing Future, and I'm one of the co-hosts and co-founders. And when I'm not here with these great people doing these podcasts, I am also a product leader for digital solutions for Ingalls ORAN, where we are making our equipment compressors smart and connected. Over to you, Ira, for a quick introduction.
All right, thanks a lot, Yen. So as a quick introduction from my side, my name's Ira Sharp, says right there in the corner, right over there. And when I'm not here on the Industry 4.0 Club, I'm the director of marketing at a company called Phoenix Contact, dealing with all the automation products in the U.S. market, and do a lot in automation, Industry 4.0, connecting different assets together. And then here, as part of the Industry 4.0 Club, I really enjoy having conversations about IoT, Industry 4.0, advanced manufacturing, and all those aspects. And this, I think, is going to be one of the most interesting conversations that we've had. And I'm super excited to hear what Todd has to say.
Yeah, Todd, please introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So Todd Lukesh, Gafcon Digital, and we are a systems integrator that brings together everything digital, really focused on the digital twin, digital thread, and what we call the digital building lifecycle. So the holistic perspective of a physical asset matched with a virtual asset and the data flow in between the two. And this application can be used toward all different assets, buildings, infrastructure, horizontal, vertical. What we're going to share a little bit about is how that's being woven into the human application of digital twins.
Yeah, so Todd, my understanding, looking at the website of Gafcon, it's most of what you guys are doing is around building management, building environments, right? Is that correct?
Yes, primarily it's been the built environment, and I say built environment because that's joined by everything from data centers to microgrid type applications to master plans, energy, district energy, a wide variety of different use cases. It's interesting because our clients will oftentimes come to us and say, well, we want a digital twin. And our response is typically, well, what is your use case? What are you trying to solve? What do you want to do with that? And a lot of times we get blank stares that say, well, I don't know, actually, but it looks cool. So we help uncover and unpeel that onion and start to look at the layers of how they want to use digital twins, why it's important for them, and more importantly, how they are going to deploy that across their organization. And for us, it's very exciting because once we have a platform in place, it allows us to add additional layers of data upon data and start to look at how do those different components interact with one another. So it becomes a very dynamic conversation. It usually starts as a proof of concept in some scenarios. And then once they start to see the applications, they say, well, what if we do this? Can you do that? And start to look at how this all data comes together in a meaningful way.
Yeah, digital twin. I got to get some of that, huh? It's oftentimes that's what I see happen too. But then you're quite right. You got to get a little bit into the details and really understand what are you, and then get a completely different solution once you get into that point. It's not just about technology; it's really about people, and it's about solving problems and helping them out. So,
That's
so
right.
Todd, we met at the ARC forum earlier this year at one of the after party events or whatever you want to call it. And I got very intrigued because again, after sitting talking to you for a little bit, we start talking about technology because as we usually do, we were 4 people at the table, and you mentioned we were talking about digital twin, and then you're saying, well, hey, just not to freak you out here, but I'm actually a digital twin myself. So that got me very, very intrigued. And I don't know if you want to maybe open up your presentation here and maybe go through a little bit of that, because that might be the right way to focus that aspect into it. And I do want to just a little public announcement here. There's a couple of images on this presentation because we are talking about a human digital interface type of thing. So there's some stuff from an operating room a little bit, but it's not too bad. I've gone through it too, but just notice if you have a little bit of a sensitive stomach, just make sure you maybe close your eyes at that point when we get to it.
Yeah, that's fair. I think this is typically podcasts don't use a whole lot of video or visualization. In this scenario, when I say I am a human digital twin, I oftentimes get blank stares like this guy is crazy. So it's a lot easier. A picture says 1,000 words. You could say a model says 1,000,000 words. So it really depends on how you look at it. So really what we're here today to talk about is how do we integrate the concept of a human digital twin with a building digital twin. And what I'm about to show you is a little bit about my history and my path and how it dovetails into what we're doing currently. And more importantly, looking ahead, what's the direction of innovation and where are we going? So like I mentioned, people ask, well, what do you do? And my response back is, how long do you have to talk? Because at a high level, I'll say I'm a digital architect, and it's been an interesting journey because I am trained and have been educated as a more commercial architect. I never went into the industry or into my career thinking that actually I would become more of a digital architect over time. And what we're here talking about is really, 4 key areas of my role with Gafcon Digital and the skill sets that we bring together. And I use this Venn diagram to kind of talk about how technology integrates with innovation and R&D investments, having an underlying core theme of building performance and sustainability, what I call BPS. And that really starts to bring in and dovetail into the mass ESG movement. And you'll notice down in that bottom far left that I actually call it ESG plus H. And I add that H because it brings in the human, it brings in the health element. And a lot of people are so focused on environmental sustainability, the social governance, and how that all comes together. Oftentimes people forget about the health and the wellness, and that really these built environments are meant for people. So why aren't we designing around people? And what I've got in the middle there are a little icon with zeros and ones. And for us, data is data. I don't care if it's coming from a building. I don't care if it's coming from a vertical infrastructure. And in my case, I don't care if it's coming from a human. And I'm going to show you a couple of different use case applications of what that means and where do we go from there. So with that, most people, and I'll have to say compliments, this is from previous employer IES based in Glasgow. And these images really represent what we call physics-based simulation digital twins. And it allows us to look at all different kinds of analytics when it comes to building performance, both inside the building, outside the building, daylight, energy consumption, HVAC airflow distribution, really gives you an idea of what is happening around the building, and with the goal in mind of how do we bring sustainability to the forefront of our design from a building performance perspective. So for those AEC community that might be on the call here, some of this might look familiar. You might actually even use this tool yourself. What we're going to talk a little bit more about today is my own experience of becoming a digital twin. And like I said earlier, when I went into this market to become a digital twin architect, I never actually thought I'd become my own digital twin. It's kind of a unique, bizarre experience. And so what you see there is top left, there's some crazy wires coming out of my head. In the middle there is a digital twin of the brain with virtual sensors that are actually integrated into my head. Far right, what you see is me wearing some VR goggles that they're walking me through different environments and different stimuli. And that's what you see in the far bottom right is flying me through different environmental conditions, lighting, airflow dynamics, sizing of spaces. And what you notice to the far left is the application of these seizures being identified. And I'll go ahead and come out and say that I've got a seizure condition. I have an epileptic condition that is in need of something a bit more invasive than traditional medications. Medications alone wasn't enough. So as I mentioned, data is data. By having this digital twin type application, we're allowed to do, it allows my neurosurgeons and people that are looking at my data the ability to do what if scenarios. And same thing like we do with buildings. So you do these what if simulations to say, how do I optimize my building performance before I actually design and build the building? For an existing facility, which is about 90% of the marketplace, how do I retrofit those existing buildings to look at optimizing performance? So you can do these what if scenarios before you actually make the retrofit. In a human situation, being able to do these virtual simulations of what if I cut here, what if I cut here, what if I drill here, it gives the neurosurgeons the ability to say, okay, well, if we make a cut here or we insert something here, these are going to be the ramifications based on Todd's personal scenario. So by having that digital twin of the brain, it allows them to do a lot of different applications of personalized brain modeling. And the way I akin this to is that when we're talking about buildings, we're talking about the brain of the building. When we're talking about humans, we're talking about the brain of the human. This sort of technology is being applied to all different sorts of scenarios. Mine in my epileptic condition is just one use case. But as we get further deep into this, you'll be able to see that this application really can be applied to all different sort of scenarios. So by building that digital twin of the brain, and this is when we start to get a little bit graphic in this next screen. So, cover your eyes if you can't stomach this, but this is the inside of what's in my head. And NeuroPace is actually the product that through multiple studies of developing that digital twin of my head through UCLA neuroscience, they were able to say, well, this is exactly the origin points of where Todd's seizures are coming from. This is where we need to have invasive scenarios to actually interrupt or prevent seizures from happening. And the reason I say that is because in the marketplace, in the built environment marketplace, a lot of people are very knowledgeable of the concept of reactive digital twins. So you're getting sets of data, you're getting historical record of information, and you're making intelligent decisions based on that, trying to forecast and predict what's happening. That then moves us into the concept of predictive analytics and starting to understand and using historical data to then make intelligent decisions in a predictive way. We're taking that one step further, and we're starting to use what we call physics-based simulations to start looking at what we call proactive maintenance as opposed to predictive or reactive. So what you see in there is basically a battery that is charging electrodes, that those electrodes are looking for inconsistencies in brainwave patterns or electrical sensory scenarios, and trying to be preventative and proactive to preventing seizures from happening before the seizure takes place. So what does that mean? Why bother? Why would you go through this painful, bizarre experience? What you're seeing here is all the data that comes out of it. And the reason I share this is because this is very similar to what we do with the buildings, and how do we improve the performance and optimize the performance of a building. And a metaphor I like to use, and it's only recently had an aha moment about this in the last couple of months, is that the whole condition for why I have this installed is to prevent seizures. For a building, we use these digital twins in a way that I would say metaphorically, we're preventing seizures of the building. We're trying to prevent downtime. We're trying to prevent, from an integrated facilities management perspective, how do we solve the problems virtually using virtual time and virtual money before we actually make a capital investment. Same sort of metaphor can be used in my scenario. With that virtual twin of my head, they were able to do these what if scenarios. Now, it's a little bit different in buildings in that you make a mistake. Typically, the building's not going to go down, right? It might be down for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. People are without HVAC, or a server goes down. For a human, it's a little more sensitive. You've got one cut and done. So the ability to use data in a very microgranular way is critical. It's very important to understand before you make that cut, what is the impact actually going to be? So let's take that same sort of parallel and try to bring them together. And that's kind of where my story begins. What you're looking at on screen is, again, compliments of IES for providing this information. But these are connecting to building management systems, energy load profiles. You're looking at baselines versus design code versus predictive analysis versus simulation. What is the building supposed to be doing versus what is the building actually doing? And that gives us a delta difference that can be measured, modified, quantified, and then addressed to be able to collate that information and do something meaningful with it. Now, if you use that same sort of metaphor and you look at my next slide, this is the data that's coming out of my head. You might notice some similarities in that data is data. Like I said earlier on this call, is data from a building are zeros and ones. Data coming from a head is zeros and ones. So what you're seeing on screen is that the live data that's being strummed out of my head at the microsecond readings is identifying patterns, and it's starting to learn my algorithms and starting to learn different sorts of scenarios that might be seizure triggers. And in a building scenario, much like with my head scenario, we're looking for applications for fault detection and diagnosis. Where are problems coming from? How can we learn from those problems? And how can we adjust the equipment, both the hardware as well as the software, to help prevent future scenarios from happening? And where you see that one there in the kind of upper right condition is seizure breakthrough. I wish I could say that what I had installed was perfect from day one, but I can't. There were breakthrough seizures that made it through the device. And while that's disappointing as a human, and I've drowned a couple times, and there's been a couple of scenarios that are unpleasant from a human condition, but stepping back from that, what an interesting lesson learned. What an interesting way to find a problem, microdose that problem, and then learn from it on how to improve it, moving one step further. Same thing what we do with buildings.
So Todd, and just correct me if I'm wrong here, but just as well as we do with building systems and also manufacturing systems, that there's a machine learning that continuous improvement, there's continuing pattern recognition and updates to it. And my understanding that's the same with your implant, right? Is that they're continually monitoring, and when there is some change in the patterns or something else, there's some corrections made. Are those corrections made directly in your implant, or is this data going into NeuroPace cloud? They're doing some investigation and they're improving by uploading some, updated firmware, whatever you want to call it, into your device.
Yeah, it's a good question, Jan. It's my answer to that would be yes. It's all of the above. In the scenario that it's taking those data sets, it's learning for load profile algorithms, it's machine learning based off a previous data set, and then it's adjusting the electrodes that are actually installed physically in my brain to learn how to identify things that are outside the range of tolerance. So every time something triggers outside the range of frequency that our brains are supposed to function, just like a building BMS, it's identifying those trends, and it's trying to proactively find when that's going to happen and do something about it. So when you say a firmware or a OS upgrade, yes, I get those. Just like our building management system, BMSs, just like our digital twins, as we get a new data set, we load that into the data profile, and that becomes part of the comprehensive, holistic modeling capacity. Same thing in my condition, working with NeuroPace, UCLA, and using that data to learn from the data, because data is only as good as what you collect, what can be measured, what can be monitored, and what can be used moving forward. Otherwise, there's no need to collect it. So you're correct in your assumption there.
So Todd, I'm kind of curious from my standpoint, with this is fascinating, right? So is the data that's collected in the learning that happens on this particular module for your brain, is it evaluated with other people that are also using this to find kind of like general patterns for triggers, or are they so unique and so specialized that it's really just tailored for you and what you're doing? Just curious about the kind of the macro data evaluation scope here.
Yeah, it's a great question, Ira. I appreciate that. So I'm not unique. I mean, I am unique as an individual, but in terms of the device and the data that it's being collected is not unique. And the reason why that's important to know is that with each person's data set, they're learning more and more about the human brain and its functionality and operation. So with each data set that comes in, if you want to metaphorically say they're building a master digital twin of a brain, it's learning more and more about how to optimize conditions. And people's triggers come on from different sorts of scenarios. Some people it's environmental conditions, some people it's dietary restrictions, some people it's based on light surroundings, some people it's stress. There's a lot of different variables that come into play. So the more data that can be collected and overlaid on top of each other, NeuroPace and similar products like them are learning how and why. And there's other programs and other groups out there like eBrains, and there's a wide variety of them. But all of this data is informing what is happening in the human brain and trying to learn from that, as you mentioned earlier, from a machine learning perspective. How do we use that data for good? And how do we apply that data and lessons learned to the next generation of NeuroPace and the next patient that needs to have one of these installed? So I forget exactly how many people have NeuroPace installed, but I think it's in the 3,000 or 4,000 category within the United States. So all that data is coming in and being leveraged in a meaningful way.
Yeah, that's really cool. Because I also wonder then, are there particular, because I'm sure this relates to other types of sensors that could be done outside the brain, then you correlate them with the brain, and then are there any correlations you could have, like maybe an increased temperature or whatever it is, could potentially relate to something else, and then that could even be used in a macro, from a macro standpoint of these 5 things that are not necessarily in the brain, but you can see that they're triggering this just by the mass data set that's collected. And that's where you get into maybe like AI could look at that versus the ML that's running on your specific device here. So I don't know if that's happening or not. I'm sure there's some topic with regards to that.
That's absolutely right, and that is what's happening. Again, just like with the physics-based digital twins on a building, we're learning. There's AI built in. There's machine learning built in. There's RPA, depending on the use case applications, and it's continuously improving, or what we reference the Kaizen approach. How do we continuously improve based on historical data and make intelligent decisions, informed decisions using data sets that allow us to improve and basically optimize our asset? And again, asset being the building and or the human or both. So that's really what we're here talking about today.
Yeah, hey, just a quick reset for someone that if they came in late into the broadcast here. This is Industry 4.0 and the Manufacturing Future Technology, and we're here with Todd Lukesh from Gafcon Digital, and talking about digital twin. And as you probably already got here, we have a little bit different perspective on digital twin, as we are talking really about the human type digital twin interacting with potentially, in this case, building management, but it could be manufacturing, it could be all kinds of different things. And Todd, so when we talked earlier, you have a very specific case here with your implant, so to speak, where I don't know if that's what you call it, but that's what I would see. But we all have kind of portions of that, Fitbits, Apple Watches, and other things that kind of also have some kind of human digital twin in some perspective. And I'd like to hear from you. What are some of the other examples that you're kind of thinking about? Because in your role, especially for building management, the occupancy sensors driving some kind of different behaviors, and the ultimate goal could be actually that we are more connected with the human digital twin to know actually not just how many is in the room, who's in the room, and et cetera, like that. What's your kind of thoughts and perspective, and what are you guys working on?
Yeah, Jan, good question. And you're getting a couple of slides ahead of me in terms of the questions, which is great, because and I'll circle back to answer that question fully. But what I'm really trying to do here is show that, again, data is data. I'm trying to connect human data with building data, and or vice versa. When we talk about performance-based digital twins, often we reference something called closed loop functionality. So the data that's being fed back from the BMS is then going back into redesign, reoperations, re-engineering, looking at how to optimize the applications of that data set, whatever it might be. Same thing from a human. So some of the terms on the far left you might be familiar with in terms of what if scenarios, to look at investments from a cost perspective. Where is the data coming from when we start talking about IoT based sensors? How does this feed into building management systems and ongoing continuous commissioning? And I use the use case down the far left as a human optimization as circadian rhythms. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But for those of you who are not familiar with circadian rhythms, it's that pattern that is learning how to what your sleep cycle is, when your peak operation cycle is, and In the building scenario, we're doing a very, very similar thing. We're looking at peak demand. We're looking at continuous commissioning. How does the building calibrate to the model so that you make a change to the digital asset, it updates the physical asset, and vice versa. When you update the physical asset, it's updating the virtual asset. Now, I wish I could say that we're there with humans, but not quite yet. We're in the process of all of that. And the way the built industry has been set up primarily is humans are forced to respond to buildings. So you might be in an open office plan where you're freezing, but somebody else might be sweating. Well, you're dealing with it, right? You put a blanket on, you take off your jacket, you deal with it. I'm trying to change that conversation to the point where how can we collect data, both invasive and non-invasive data from humans, so that the buildings are responding to the occupants, not the other way around. Keeping energy management, optimization, sustainability, building performance, all as part of the process. So if sorry, I'm going the wrong way here. If I take that one step further and look at a use case example, you see on the far left, the human digital twin looking at circadian rhythms. What are the algorithms that are coming from the machine learning? What does that data mean? On the far right, you're looking at the life cycle of a building digital twin. How does that physical building connect with the virtual asset? And what is the data that's coming out of it from a real-time analytics, from a fault detection, and having that bi-directional communication? So with that in mind, I'm not suggesting everybody's going to go out there and get their head cut open and some hardware put in there. That's too much like the Matrix, or a little bit too, far out there. In my scenario, it was the last option, right? Like I said, medicine wasn't enough to intervene, so that it'd do something a little bit more invasive. For those who maybe are collecting data or want to be collecting data, there's all kinds of wearables, right? There's all kinds of Fitbits, there's Apple Watches, there's all different kinds of things that can be worn to collect data on human performance. And that's, again, where that H of the ESG plus H comes into play. And also, people might be familiar with IoT networks. Something people might not be aware of is something called IOA, Internet of Actions or Internet of Activity. So how do the activities of the occupants come into play? And how does that dovetail into the IoT network? And more importantly, how is that connecting to the BMS, the building management system, so that this collective data is being pulled together in a comprehensive way, so it tells the building what to do next to maximize human comfort? So if I take that step one step further, I have to give out some props to my colleague, Hal, who, when I explained my scenario, my own situation, he thought, oh my God, that's so cool. I've got to go buy some wearables. And what you're seeing come out of Hal's experience is all kinds of things with heart rate, sleep rates, temperature readings, heart rate variables, a lot of different vitals that you might be being measured at a hospital or in a healthcare facility, but maybe people aren't necessarily doing that at home. But a lot of people are wearing these devices and they're collecting data, but maybe that's all they're doing. And they're just looking at trending patterns and looking at, their step count for the day, for example. But there's so much more that can be optimized using this data. So, the way I correlate this is, I'm not saying I'm like Elon Musk in the sense that, multi-billionaire, but what I am trying to say is that in my situation, I too am on the spectrum. I've got what you might consider a disability. And what I've tried to do is turn that disability into an asset. And in summary, there is a direct correlation between the built environment and the human assets that are part of the built environment. And for me personally, even though I've had a couple breakthroughs, I'm looking at human optimization, right? For me, it required a physical install, but for you and probably the mass majority of people on the call here, we're looking at data coming from all of your wearables. For the building, we're looking at building performance optimization. And where I'm trying to go with this is how do we bring these things called BCI, brain computer interface, and HCI, human computer integration, into that equation so that there's that bi-directional communication between the human asset and the building asset. And at the end of the day, you're optimizing both assets simultaneously. So I'll leave it at that because that's kind of my story, and I know it's a little bit different than what you may have seen on this this podcast series. But I was primarily showing commercial scale buildings, but this is applicable to any built asset. If it moves, or it can be measured, it can be modeled, it can be optimized.
No, absolutely. This has been amazing just to hear about your story and then how you actually are able to kind of weave that into what you're actually doing from a professional perspective as well. Very, very interesting. Especially when you're also talking about, the more, how should I say, general applications of this, where we're talking about, non-invasive type of devices that are collecting information about you. We talk about the Fitbit, the Apple Watch, and there's definitely a lot of stuff going on there around specific applications around health, exercise, that kind of stuff. I just read the Apple Watch will be able to, for diabetics, be able to read your blood sugar level, which is very, very interesting from a non-invasive perspective. That's kind of amazing. And if you can do that, then what else could you think about doing from a non-invasive perspective? That's so there's a lot of stuff there. But I like your idea of, well, that's one part, right? But how do you kind of match that up with your environment? And there's probably a lot of standardizations, open standardization that has to be kind of put in place so that a Fitbit and an Apple Watch doesn't really matter, but the data can still be shared with the surrounding environment in some level. Like what is your current temperature and comfort level right now? What is your anxiety level right now? What is your heart rate, etc. And how does that affect what's going on around you?
Yeah,
I like that idea a lot. This is something we haven't talked about at all.
Yeah, it's a good good question, and we're definitely in line with each other, working on several different use cases for healthcare applications. And let's just use that example you shared there, and say instead of getting admitted to the hospital when you're going to have some sort of operation or some sort of treatment of some kind. Instead of getting a wristband that is just a plastic wristband that has your ID, you're getting a smartwatch that's reading your vitals. It's reading temperature. It's reading your heart rate. It's reading blood pressure. It's reading all the different things that you might get measured while admitted in the ER or healthcare environment. Once I've got data sets that are being collected from that human wearable, that data can be sourced and transmitted to the IoT network or framework that's in place, the existing infrastructure of that facility. That data from the IoT network is being sent to the building management system, which starts to say, okay, Todd as a patient or Jan as a patient is starting to enter their circadian rhythms. How do we optimize that space to accelerate his sleep recovery? So how do I, automatically close the blinds? What's the optimum temperature or humidity that is most conducive to getting Todd to rest and getting to sleep, and basically accelerate recovery? Take that same metaphor, and it can be applied to a office application or to a higher education or K through 12 scenario. There's a use case with a previous company that started looking at CO2 inside of a building or light registry inside of K through 12 facility, noticing that students started to fall asleep at a certain carbon ppm, parts per million, and started realizing, okay, well, let that be a dashboard that says open a window, turn on the HVAC, let's up the quantity of fresh air versus recycled air. So using that data, again, like I said earlier, it's about the use case. How do I take that data and put it to use in a meaningful way that impacts the occupants, along with the building optimization? We're trying to optimize those humans as well.
It is really interesting that the two data sets kind of coming together to create, you know, a better environment, and I think this is definitely where a lot of things are going, and I know it's a reality now. I do wonder a little bit about the data privacy aspects of things, and how do you secure these? And you know, yes, my vitals are there, maybe they're being used in this particular use case, but are they also being utilized by somebody else in healthcare for modeling? Do we insure people, how we insure people, and these kinds of things? I mean, I don't know if that's outside of the scope, if that's something you thought about or looked at all, but just generally maybe curious.
Yeah, I think the idea that you walk into a building and you see on your phone, it says the building would like to know how you feel. Do you want to share it?
Well, they have those buttons in the airport, right? But nobody ever uses them. But if your watch just tells it.
Yeah, both good points. Data privacy is obviously a big issue, both for buildings as well as for humans. And the layer of cybersecurity required to protect that data or anonymize the data so it can't be divulging each individual asset or person, and more importantly, hackability, right? I mean, in theory, a building could be hacked, right? And the building management system could say, well, it's freezing outside, but it's actually 100 degrees, but it's kicking on the heat when it should be kicking on the AC. In theory, you could argue that with all of that data in my situation, could a human be hackable? Don't know. So, you know, that's a whole nother conversation to have with, you know, the cyber folks that specialize in that area. But cyber in my condition is treated very securely, in the sense that my data is only hardwire enabled directly to the manufacturer of this device, where they're taking the data sets and learning my patterns, algorithms, and doing something to move forward. But yes, data privacy is an issue. HIPAA waivers are sometimes required depending on the use. And, you know, for me personally, my data set, I've signed the HIPAA waiver that says, yes, please use my data for the greater good. Much like, to your point, Jan, if you walk into a space or a public sector and you connect to a public Wi-Fi, do you want to opt in? You know, it requires that extra step of saying, yes, I'm willing to share my data because of X, Y, and Z. I think that there's a cultural shift that needs to happen eventually, where people are comfortable with sharing their data and understand that sharing their data doesn't mean that they're giving up their privacy rights, but it's actually being used in different applications that might improve both optimizing your own environment for performance, but then also maybe looking at the sustainability component from a building performance side of your facility. And that starts to dovetail into, you know, do people care about decarbonization and climate change? And so there's all different kinds of connection points there that could be considered.
Yeah, my example was just really related to when, let's say, I open a Google Maps app right away, and the browser said, "Hey, do you want to share your location?" If I go on a shopping store or whatever and says go find a local representative, it asks me for my location, right? And I can see the idea that it's standardized in some way, and there's a broader value of doing it. That when you walk into a building and you have that kind of I'm normally sharing some of my information. You can get a little little trigger and says, hey, the Bank of America building you're in would like to know your, not necessarily your health, but your comfort data. Do you want to share it, right? And then that could then drive a lot of that kind of stuff in the future. That's and you're definitely in the area of like commercial building stuff, but I would be interesting too. What about knowing people home? What's going on with that? Because there could be a lot more actionable stuff because now it becomes personalized. When I walk into my office, it's me in
Yeah.
my office, and then it's a lot easier. There's not 10 people in there, it's just me in there. It's easier to kind of adapt to what I want.
Yeah, that's right. And we see a lot of home IoT enabled devices. Nest is a perfect example that connects to your Amazon Alexa or Google Home or whatever device you might have enabled in your home. It's learning your sleep cycle. It's learning when you're coming home with groceries. It's learning when you're cooking and creating humidity or temperature jumps in your kitchen. And so it's learning those sorts of patterns. So you might be more likely to opt in your home environment or your personalized office environment than you would say at an airport or a retail. There's also the questions that come up with are retailers in a position to use data that people perhaps opt in when they walk into a Best Buy or a Costco or whatever it might be, and say, well, we can see that based on you looking at the the freezer section or the furniture area or MP3 players or whatever device it is that you're looking for, is that generating energy? Is that generating people's actions? And is it getting them to register in a way that says, we really need to move these devices to the front of the store to draw these people in? So there is a commercialization aspect to all of this that very advanced retailers are starting to weave into their marketing strategy and design strategies. And my personal condition, and really where I'm trying to focus, is more on the med tech and the innovations on the medical side, and how does that dovetail into the built environment to optimize human performance. But yes, to your point, there's absolutely the commercialized side of it when it comes to retail, and how does that data get used for sales and marketing.
And
Right. Yeah.
that's the fascinating part to me with these different data sets and how they can all come together and how they can be used in so many different ways. I mean, I'm a marketing guy. I'm obviously not a retail marketing guy, but I did do retail for a long time, and I can only imagine how you could utilize that kind of data for exactly the reasons that you mentioned. So
Absolutely right.
Yeah, and some of it can be done by just cameras and looking at that, but kind of integrating it into like a personal device that is sharing information about that. That's kind of like the next level, right?
yeah,
Understanding and I mean, with like even different area, but like autonomous cars, right? The ultimate idea is that every car knows the cars around them, and the same could be with people, right? That there are systems in the future that will know who's around me because we all communicate to each other, kind of like from some kind of network perspective, and that could be used in a building environment as well, knowing who's actually, or maybe not who again from a privacy perspective, but how many people and what are their, you know, the data that they want to share. What are they telling us about that? So, for example, like older people like me, I'm in one area of the store, and then younger people are in the other area of the store, right? That could be very interesting because you can not always to see that from cameras, right? But yeah, there's a lot of interesting applications here, a lot of stuff going on, slow moving stuff, but very interesting. And I think you've definitely brought some perspective for me, at least, on some other things that I can see could be interesting, taking that to the next step. We talked a little bit about Elon Musk and his Neuralink. I mentioned earlier when we talked that there's a Japanese university that has been able to, with MRI, be able to identify an image that a person is seeing. So the person seeing with their eyes an image, for the MRI, they can replicate with an AI that image that they're seeing using some generative AI. So it's not exactly that image, but it's something close to what that image is. There's tons of stuff going on that in this human interface stuff that could be interesting going forward as well with. So it's been a very, very interesting conversation. One last question that I
Sure.
would like to hear from you, what your thoughts are. So you have epilepsy triggers. Could you think of at some point where the building actually react to Todd's in the building? Let's make the lighting something that doesn't trigger his seizures, for example, or something like that. Is that something you have thought of as well? That's kind of like interesting to me to see how deep do
Yeah.
you go, right?
Yeah, it's a good question, and that's why I shared the one slide where I was wearing the VR goggles and it was flying me through different environmental conditions that you might experience in a commercial office or open marketplace, even a home environment. They flew me through all different sorts of scenarios to see how my brain waves were triggering and to potentially identify what sort of scenarios might trigger more electrical circuitry than others, to see as part of the testing abstract, how can that data be collected and used to help identify exactly excuse me, what Todd needs as a patient to optimize his performance. And taking that one step back, there was something I wanted to mention earlier, that both humans and buildings, infrastructure, whatever it might be, we at Gafcon Digital use a phrase or metaphor that we call the 3 Cs. It's communicate, collaborate, and correlate. So when we're talking about data sets, we're talking about how are we using those data collections to communicate something of need, of value to the end user, whatever that might be. How do we collaborate, right? Because in legacy buildings, you have all kinds of systems. In healthcare, you have all kinds of systems that are collecting data sets, but that data might not be collaborating. And it's important that that data set speaks to another data set because it's deriving value in those sets being collaborated. And then probably the most important part of that 3 C is the correlation. How do you take that meaningful data that's now been communicated from all these devices, assets, humans, buildings? How do you collaborate with those data sets? But then how do you correlate it to become an action item? How do you bring it together in a meaningful way that you're solving predictive and proactive scenarios to, again, close loop that system that we were talking about earlier? So a bit of a long-winded question or answer to your question, Jan. I apologize for that. But it's kind of a nice way to talk about data, zeros and ones, communication, collaboration, and correlation.
That's a nice analogy. I like it. Yeah, it's there's when you deploying these kind of digital twins, data systems, and analytic system, machine learning, digital twin, whatever, right? If you can make systems work together by looking at the different data sets, that's what it's all about, right? So when we in manufacturing talking about downtime, it's not just about the machine being down. It's like, what's the current shift? What's my production schedule? All that kind of stuff. It's all kind of tying these things together and then make some patterns out of it that allows you to predict what's the best scenario that you want to accomplish in some way or another. So that makes sense. And buildings are they have just as much complexity around different data sets. You talked a little bit before microgrids. There's all kinds of different elements of managing a building: HVAC, energy use, occupancy, the schedule, whatever it is. Right? There's tons of stuff that if you can use those data sets and then better optimize what you're doing both right now, but also plan for the future, right? If you, especially with like energy today, right? If you could plan for, hey, we're going to shut down two of our big HVAC stuff at 5 o'clock because we know everybody's going to leave and go home. And now we can, we can tell the energy company that we've now using minimal energy right now and whatever it is. Right, there's tons of stuff that's what it's all about right now. Is it's as a community we're starting to integrate our different data sets to better help optimize various different things around energy, sustainability, environment, and to your point, health as well. So it's been a very interesting conversation. I'm really glad that you agreed to join us here today. I'm floored about all the stuff that's going on that I didn't know about, and there's more coming, I'm sure. Ira, any thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been a fantastic conversation. I also agree. There's lots of things that I didn't know that it's fascinating though now. I love the H adding to the ESG side of things, that human element to it and how it all interacts. So I thought it was a great conversation, great presentation, discussion all the way around. So thanks, Todd, for joining us, and Yen, I think this was a great discussion.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Todd, any thoughts from your perspective?
No, I mean, we could probably spend a week about different applications and, the correlations of, when we talk about ESG plus H, what takes the priority? Does the energy cost take priority, or does the human take priority? Or is there an inflection point that both the humans can be happy as well as my utility bill can be happy? So we could talk about, the prioritization of data sets as, this all comes together, but perhaps on a future discussion, we can talk about the, the nitty gritty components of how all that comes together. But thank you for this opportunity to kind of share my story here, and hopefully it gets people's minds, pun intended, I guess, to start thinking outside of the box of where this technology can be used, leveraged, and derive value.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. This has been great again. Thank you very much for joining. Thank everybody that joins our conversation here, both right now live and going forward when able to listen to the recording. This has been a great session. I know we're going to promote it because this is something that people should actually go in and look at again, because there's a ton of good stuff here. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Todd, for joining us. Thank you, Ira, for helping out here today again, as usual, my trusted co-host and friend. So with that, I think we're going to close it here today. Watch out for future sessions here, both on this topic and others. You can go on a schedule on the website for the schedule at industry40club.com, or you can here on LinkedIn. Follow our page on LinkedIn, and you'll be notified when we have our usual Monday and Wednesday sessions every week. Tomorrow, I don't think we have anything coming up, but next week we have a couple of sessions coming up as well. So watch out for that next week. With that, thanks very much. And thanks again, Todd. And we will put our little closing video on. And you guys all have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it.